So for my second trig graph, I picked a tangent because it has several things that are different than the sine and cosine graphs. I decided to make a separate video for this so that the videos wouldn't be too long. So the first thing is the number in front of tangent, which is a 2. Now that's normally where our amplitude is located, but technically with tangent and cotangent, the amplitude, there is none. So if your teacher asks you for the amplitude of tangent, just say none. But that 2 is still important, so I'm going to call it our fake amplitude, and I'm just going to put it in our list here so that we don't forget about it. Now the next thing with tangent is the period. So this number that's in front of x on the outside of the parentheses, we're going to take that. For period, we take pi divided by b. And that's for tangent and cotangent that we do that. So we're going to do pi divided by 1/6. So it will be easier to multiply by the reciprocal of 1/6. So pi times 6/1, that equals 6 pi. Now tangent has asymptotes. And so to figure out where those will be placed, we would want to do the period that we just got and divide it by 2, and I'll show you why in a second. So we're going to take 6 pi, divide by 2, which is 3 pi, and then this is going to help us figure out where the asymptotes go. Asymptotes. Okay, so that'll be helpful in a minute. And then the spacing, this will be helpful to get the tick marks onto the x-axis. So just like with sine, take the period and divide by 4. So 6 pi divided by 4 is 3 pi over 2. And I think with this problem, having it as a decimal will be easier. So let's say 1.5 pi. And let's circle that. So that's our spacing. Then the horizontal shift, that's the number inside of the parentheses with the x, and it's always the opposite of the number written in there, so it's going to be shifted to the right pi, or you could just say positive pi, either way. And then the horizontal shift is the number either added or subtracted on the outside of the parentheses. That's a +3, so it's going to be a vertical shift of up 3, or you could say just +3. Now the vertical shift they sometimes write in front of the equation, so they might have it written as 3 + 2 tangent 1/6. If they have it written this way, the 3 is still the vertical shift. It means the same thing as the original. Some books just choose to write it that way. All right, so now for the graphing. One thing to keep in mind with tangent is that when you draw the basic just y equals tangent x graph without any shifting, it has a period of pi, and if you look at a picture of it in your book or in your notes, the asymptotes are at pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. They are just half of the period on either side of the y-axis. That's the whole reason why up here I divided the period by 2 and I got 3 pi. So on our main graph over here, we would have had asymptotes at -3 pi and +3 pi. But in our problem, we also had this horizontal shift of right pi. So we're going to pick up each of those asymptotes and move them to the right pi. So that's going to make this one change to -2 pi, and it's going to change this one to 4 pi. And I'm just going to erase these other two. Oops. Let's get that back in there. And I'll just get rid of this so that it's not confusing. Okay, so those are going to be our asymptotes. So here's this one, and here's this one. Okay, now the whole reason for the spacing was to get the tick marks in between. The spacing we had written down as a decimal. It was 1.5 pi. So what I'm going to do, my very first number on this graph is negative 2 pi. So if I add 1.5 pi to that, that gets me negative 0.5 pi. That's going to be my next tick mark on the x-axis. Then I just continue adding 1.5 pi to get to the next tick mark. So that brings me up to positive 1 pi. So that would be here. And then 1 pi plus 1.5 pi is 2.5 pi, which is going to be here, and that's it, because if I add another 1.5 pi to that, that gets me right to the 4 pi, which is what should have happened. So now to graph the things on the y-axis. So the very first thing to show for that is the vertical shift, which we said was up 3. So we plot 1, 2, 3, right there. So that's the vertical shift. And then the fake amplitude. Remember we said that was 2. So from 3, we're going to count up 2, taking us to 5, and down 2, which takes us to 1. Now we have all of the important numbers on this picture. So to make the actual curve, I'll show you on our little tiny graph over here. Tangent is like a little curve. Some people describe it as looking like a lazy river. That's the shape of it. So what happens over here is our first point is at the lowest part of our amplitude. So that would be there. Our in-between point is at the middle at the 3. And then our final point is at the top at 5. So at our first tick mark on the x-axis, so at the first tick mark, you're at the lowest part of the amplitude. At the next tick mark, you're in the middle at 3. And at the third tick mark, you're at the highest part of the amplitude, which is 5. So it just goes in that order. Then you just have to connect the points into that curved shape, which goes like this, and then it goes like that. And just make sure it reaches over to both of the asymptotes. I've seen some teachers take points off if your tangent curve isn't spread out far enough towards those two asymptotes. And that's the whole thing.